China is an ancient civilization that has existed for about 4,000 years. They are responsible for some of the most important inventions, such as the compass, gunpowder, paper, and printing machines. However, China is also a place where some of the cruelest emperors ruled, capable of giving orders and committing such heinous acts that are hard to believe. Here are some of the most terrible examples. Gao Yan was a notorious drunkard who sat on the throne of the Northern Wei Empire from 529 to 559. The emperor was not always a terrible drunkard. He started his reign quite successfully, strengthening the military potential and reducing taxes. In fact, in a short period of time, the Northern Wei became the leading state in China, causing universal admiration. But as his empire thrived, Gao Yan started to indulge more and more in his favorite pastime. To celebrate the stability he brought to the country in the later stages of his life, excessive drinking turned the emperor from a respected statesman into a madman. His debauched acts became the norm of court life. His excessive love for women forced the emperor to engage in an illicit affair with his wife's sister, who was in a relationship with a Chinese prince. Overwhelmed by jealousy, the emperor ordered the prince to be killed in a drunken state, and in search of new entertainment, he beheaded his wife's sister, displaying the severed head around his dining table. Since the emperor enjoyed inflicting pain on people when he was drunk, his prime minister made sure he always had a supply of condemned prisoners he could kill. Sometimes, Gao Yan could be openly disrespectful to his elders, such as his mother, Empress Lu Chaozi, whom he threatened to marry off to an old barbarian ruler after a quarrel. After this incident, Gao Yan promised his mother that he would quit drinking forever. However, the deranged son lasted only 10 days before he turned back to the bottle. Tago Temur ascended to the Chinese throne in 1333. When he was only 13 years old, he became the longest reigning monarch of the Yuan dynasty, given his young age. It is quite natural that Timur grew up with a sense of his own greatness. Perhaps his equally eccentric advisor, Bayan, who suggested executing all the Chinese with the 5 most popular names, influenced him, approximately 90% of the population. Timur would have been more interested in dressing up as a Buddhist monk and organizing elite sex parties in the territory of his palace rather than governing the state. He also did not consider his responsibilities and built a huge stage so that one could watch performances of dancers at any time of the day. When he did not indulge in carnal pleasures, the emperor was passionate about being a builder. He oversaw the construction of exquisite water clocks and a pleasure boat for his personal lake. Meanwhile, his state was plagued by floods and epidemics. In 4340, his indifference to the state would continue to haunt the emperor. When in 1368 his capital Sujiang was captured by the Chinese rebel Zhu Yuanzhang, the founder of the Ming dynasty, Timur was forced to flee his beautiful capital to Mongolia, where he died of diarrhea in 1370. Sun Hao, who ruled China from 242 to 284, was not only an incompetent emperor, but also a vengeful person, killing anyone who disagreed with him. At first, Sun Hao took his new position seriously, winning over the people's elected representatives by lowering taxes, regulating the behavior of many corrupt officials, and freeing many concubines. However, soon his duties became boring to him, and he preferred to fill his days with wine, women, and orders for execution. Sun Hao was obsessed with the idea of turning the most beautiful women of his kingdom into concubines, whom he sought among the families of his officials. Vil believed that before any marriage, his subordinates should present their daughters to him so that he could decide whether to make them new members of his harem. Sun Hao also closely guarded his concubines. One of his officials was beheaded with a heated sword after he killed a maid of one of the emperor's favorites. He was also a terrible alcoholic who punished others for not drinking alcohol. If Vil noticed that one of his officials did not drink at one of his lavish parties, they usually lost their head or were thrown into the river to drown. Sometimes Sun Hao showed mercy and did not kill them, preferring instead to horribly disfigure their faces while they were still alive. Sun Hao maintained his murderous rage even towards his relatives, which was fully manifested when a dispute erupted between his 2 sons, Sun Qi and Sun Fan. To settle the dispute, he ordered Sun Fan to commit suicide and exiled Sun Qi to another province so that the dispute would no longer bother his stay. Sun Hao's tenure in power was extremely brief, only 1 year. In 364 AD, he was an insecure monarch who constantly believed that his relatives were plotting to overthrow him. As a result, his short rule was characterized by paranoid outbursts and assassinations against his large family. He began by forcing his younger brother and potential successor, Lu Zheluang, to take his own life, and then cut off both of his ears. The emperor killed all the people who were loyal to his predecessor. Emperor Lu Xunhao also had incestuous relationships with his relatives, entering into several incestuous relationships with them. Once he forced his aunt to satisfy his lust, and he killed his own uncle after he conspired against his mentally ill nephew. Lu's preserved his uncle's eyes as a memento by putting them in honey and calling them pickled eyes of the ghost. He also happily shared a bed with his sister, and the emperor gave his sister dozens of suitors as gifts. After she complained how unfair it was that he had so many concubines, group sex became a regular activity, and the emperor derived pleasure from having sexual relations with his own servants. Lu saw his crimes as too severe for his uncle, who killed him before he could cause more harm. King Zhou Shan, who led the Zhou dynasty from 1075 to 1046 BCE, was another unpredictable tyrant who enjoyed the pain and suffering of others. However, he is most famous for the delicacies of his royal garden. Zhou Shan ordered the construction of a wine pool in the center of his palace grounds, with an artificial island surrounded by a forest of meat. The trees were made of meat skewers, and thick pieces of roasted chicken, beef, and pork hung from the branches. This was done so that he and his friends could drink the finest wine and pluck the most delicious pieces of meat from the trees whenever they pleased, enjoying exquisite dishes. Zhou Shan also held elaborate sadistic games in his garden. One of his favorite games involved ordering his concubines and male servants to engage in group sex at sunset, while they indulged in delicious treats from his garden. When Zhou Shan grew tired of this, he would choose a pair at random and brutally beat them to near death. When the beatings were finished, the victims were thrown into a cart called the waste trough. Zhou Shan also had another death ritual called punishment by burning flesh with a heated iron. Prisoners of all ranks, including high-ranking officials, were forced to embrace a hollow bronze cylinder heated from the inside with smoldering charcoal, resulting in a torturous death. His family also did not escape his psychopathic whims. When his ailing uncle, the last true sage, criticized his actions, his chest was opened up to check if his heart was truly great. Empress Wu was the only woman to ever become Empress of China. Her reign, which lasted from 619 to 705, showed that she was just as crazy as the male emperors. She first gained supreme power by strangling her own daughter and killing Empress Wang in order to marry the emperor. Empress Wu then drowned her husband in the wine pool and crowned herself as empress. Immediately as empress, she set to work, exterminating all her enemies. Within a year, 15 noble families had been exterminated, and many were even ordered to kill themselves before her eyes. She was aided by her own terrifying secret police, who operated a network of informants to eliminate all possible enemies. When she wasn't exterminating the aristocracy, the empress enjoyed the company of her harem of concubines and men. As an older woman, Empress Wu allowed 2 of her favorite men from her harem to run her court, turning it into a den of gambling, debauchery, and open prostitution. She also manipulated Buddhist doctrine. After her sleeping with her high priest, he claimed that she was the next incarnation of Buddha. The only way in which Empress Wu differed from the male emperors was that she somehow survived her reign and peacefully abdicated in 705. The emperors of China were arguably the most bloodthirsty madmen to ever live. Inheriting the royal court and empire, they could bring even the darkest fantasies to life with just a word or the snap of their fingers. In conclusion, the Chinese emperors serve as a perfect example of unlimited power.